the closely comparative conceptry of the Greeks, Eusebia, Dikaiosune, Themis, Moira. Now, one that a more recently met associate has pointed out to me is Eusebia, an ancient Greek term actually used quite directly to translate Dharma into ancient Greek by Ashoka in one of his more famous inscriptions. It is actually a rather good fit, and indeed the notion of a good fit is quite important for Rita, Sukha, for instance, being understandable, as the joy derived from moving well in congruence with one's Dharma, with the essential underpinning meaning to it being to do the righteous thing, Eu meaning as in good, Sebia from Sebamai, effectively meaning a sense of being God-fearing. And that is rather literal for the Greeks, for obvious reasons. They had much to be fearful of, as we all do. And thence undertaking action aware of both the awe of the divine and the holy terror of what happens to you should you attempt to go actively against same. We might think of it as applied piety in that sense, for it took on a broad range of particular areas under the aegis, in terms of social relationships and cultural custom, all of which were underpinned and overseen by the gods, and, as we have noted above, with both divine figures, goddesses for the most part, as the positive expressions of these, as well as via the Ernies and Nemesis, who could also preside over positive desserts, we must add, the negative and the enforcement aspect likewise. I tend to point to Dikaiosyne when I am after a Greek rendering for Rita, as what it means, that which is pointed out from Proto-Indo-European dak, the root for Greek dactyl, meaning finger or digit, the Germanic teach, via the DT sound shift, which we're of course quite familiar with, like dent becomes tooth, for instance, and Latinate dictate, dictator, etc., all of which effectively build from its pointing original kernel of meaning. These nicely convey the sense of something which is already immanent, yet which not all of us may be able to perceive, thus requiring the seer to do just exactly that, to point out what it is that is just. And certainly, justice is what the term most usually means, the fulfillment of the law, but also the general essential quality of law to begin with, which again takes us back to the ancient Greek Dike and the goddess of that particular name. Astrea, for those of you who are taking an interest in the heavens, forms the figure of Virgo in Western astrology, precisely due to this concept, pointing out the righteous conduct, and hence also pointing, perhaps, at Libra, the bearer of the scales of justice. The situation of Astrea, having vanished from this mortal globe of ours in order to take up stance and station midst the heavens, is also quite relevant, as in a similar manner to how the saliency of Rita declines and diminishes over the course of the Yuga cycle, eventually seeming much more seriously significantly absent during the current Yuga. So too does it appear that the Greeks thought the cosmic aura became an ever more remote graha, that being a body exerting gravity, for those of you not familiar with the Sanskrit, we might say from the same root, and also tends to mean a celestial object, although never quite vanishing entirely, and still being very much visible, if you knew where to look, pointing upwards, we might say, to the celestial spheres, where she still stands to this day, to inspire and to lift our gazes, and our aspirations for the good life, the pious life, likewise illuminating the dark night. Another point of relevancy would of course be Themis, both in terms of the goddess by that name, but also the notion of the divine law, directly entailed by the theonym and the accompanying noun. Themis means both divine law and, of course, divine justice, but also the active expression of that law, via custom and our adherency thereto, as well as going the other way, via various sendings and oracular manifestations to man from the gods in the broader divine realm, that which is pointed out indeed, which implies that certain oracular events are actually somebody correctly perceiving the underlying plan and ordering of the universe, getting a peek at the script for the cosmic drama or the divine play we might perhaps suggest. I mention Themis here because there is actually a rather good fitting, again, between what is understood by Rita, wherein the divine order, the cosmic law, is in fact over and above the gods, and also binding upon them, and what we get from the Greek perspectives upon her. In Antoninus Liberalis' Metamorphoses, for instance, we find Zeus wanting to smite some humans who have disturbed the sanctity of a holy site to make off with the wealth contained therein, and being told sternly by Themis et al. That even he is unable to kill anybody upon such incredibly sacred ground, and so, relenting, he instead turns the impious would-be desecrators into birds instead. As it happens, the theme of sacred ground being inviolable to killing is a broadly pan-Indo-European one. A major example that many shall be familiar with concerns the C.A.R. not putting the Fenris wolf to death precisely because said wolf was in such a space, and to do so would be to violate cosmic law. The concept of the Moira, I should say, and of Moira is also relevant here. We would know these in modern English perhaps as the fates and fate respectively. Dharma, in the sense of one's fate, or if we are being less heavy-handed perhaps one's calling, has obvious conceptual symmetry to this notion, as, after all, the mode of one's contributory duty being allotted and apportioned to one is fairly exactly what the Moira in question is also intended to encompass. We are simply taking the broader view and extrapolating it from the ultimate outcome, to also the process, via which said outcome may be reached and entailed. Something quite reasonably in concordancy with what the Greeks had actually understood via the concept. All things considered, while it is evident that we are dealing with multiple terms in the ancient Greek lexicon of considerable coterminity to what we are meaning by Dharma and Rita in various ways, I have little doubt that the same ultimate underpinning to Indo-European understandings, that of an overarching divine law and cosmic order, with an array of in-universe, in-community, and indeed in-person, tangible expressions and pathway guides for virtuous action and congruence thereto, are being communicated in each cultural context. Enough so that, historically speaking at least, some degree of simple direct translation was even evidently viable between them.